I'm Stephen Henry Madoff. I'm the founding chair of the Master's Program in Curatorial Practice at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, a two-year program for master's students learning the practice, history, and theory of curating. And each week we hold the Curatorial Roundtable, which brings together distinguished curators and directors from around the world to speak about their work. And today I'm really happy to have Hajra, who I thought was going to be in Berlin, but in fact is Indonesia, and maybe she'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm going to read a brief bio that Hajra has sent, and then I will turn things over to her. I'll just mention that Hajra will talk for about 50 minutes, and then the last 10 minutes of the session, you can put questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll read them, and Hajra will reply. So Hajra Haidar Karar is a curator and writer invested in articulating questions that destabilize and reconfigure colonial and capital paradigms that lay at the foundations of knowledge production by working through ancestral and effective epistemes. Currently, she's the senior curator at Savvy Contemporary, the Laboratory of Form Ideas in Berlin. Formerly, Hajra was the chief curator of the IVS Gallery and Faculty of Visual Arts at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, IVS Gallery in Karachi, and a core member of the Tentative Collective. Hajra has curated a trilogy of survey exhibitions titled Look at the City from Here at the AAN Art Space and Museum, Karachi in 2016 and 2021. She curated a retrospective of the work of Billy Bijoka. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hajra initiated the ongoing discursive project, Who Gets to Talk About Whom? Collective Thinking and Its Politics in the Decolonial Turn in 2018, and her projects have been featured at cultural institutions and biennials around the world, from Paris to Lahore, Moscow to Berlin, London to Azerbaijan and Kochi. She was the curatorial fellow of the ITP 2014 program at the British Museum and the recipient of the ISAP DAAD Research Fellowship of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Yale University in 2019 and 2020. And welcome, Hajra.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for the introduction and for inviting me and providing this generous space to share some thoughts about some research activities that I've been engaged in. So yes, as Stephen shared, that I am right now in Yogyakarta, right? And it's 8 p.m. right now, and quite nicely warm and humid, but lovely to join you all from here with some really beautiful energies around. I've just visiting for the Jogja Biennale right now, and I was part of the Biennale Forum, so it's really been really heartwarming, grounding experience to be here and to be in conversation and to see the kind of work that's being done on the ground. These are, of course, once again, really dark times, and again, a time for reflection on our role and positionalities and the contributions that we make towards thinking of a different and working towards a different present and future. So I hope that the session today is a bit conducive in generating some questions, perhaps. So I will just share a little bit. Stephen has shared the bio already, but I just wanted to share a bit more that, of course, at the base of the practice is very much the foundations are within critical inquiry and knowledge production, especially in terms of alternative knowledges that against the imposed notions and ideologies that have been exclusionary and that are or rather not fluid enough to accommodate different kinds of knowledge. So how do we, so the question really arises, and that is why I really phrase my practice as articulating questions, because I think that's the most important part of the process, in asking the kind of questions, because that is the answer that you will get. So in this process, the idea is to create a platform for narratives that have been erased, obscured, and to create, to create a space where they could be rewritten, re-articulated, and rephrased. So, and quite fortunately, I'm part of a space that is based on ideas of conviviality and hospitality, which basically is an attempt in erasing the distance between the self and the other, and really celebrating the diversity of epistemes. So I'm just, so in that, thinking along those lines, the exhibitionary takes a lot of different formats. So it's not just exhibition making in terms of working with artworks, but has a lot to do with the written word, the aesthetic formations, visual language, sound, performance, which is embodied knowledge, community engagement, food traditions, craft knowledges. It's basically a constant renegotiation of agencies within the designed environment. So it's really thinking of, so in this way, it's really thinking of the exhibitionary as a catalyst, and what kind of, so we pose the questions, and we, like you set forward emotion, and how does it unravel, where does it go? And that's always, I think, the outcome sometimes is not the most important as putting the question out there, because it's important to see and to constantly reflect on how that's going to shape up. So in that, the attempt is to have embodied knowledges, histories, and memories in association when putting different positionalities together, and also creating, and in that way also creating a pluriverse of interdependent knowledges and how they resonate, but how they also expand certain ideas. So I'm going to today share 3 projects. It's a bit ambitious maybe, but let's see how we work with time. So otherwise I'll just share 2, but so these are projects. The reason why I share them is that they each have varied scopes and formats, but they have multiple resonances. So we can see how each one flows into the other as well. And I've also been engaged in each one of them in a different capacity as well. So the first one that I am going to share, I will now finally share my presentation. So the first project that I'm going to share is one that has been conceived and curated by me, and what you see right now are some exhibition views of it. And this was a research exhibition and participatory project that was for a duration of 1.5 years, and it was basically an attempt to, and took Shahram Khosravi's work as a point of departure, and it was an attempt to expand the narrative on non-linear time, where universal time and linear time is a construct of Western and capital paradigms. It is really thinking of what happens when the same systems push you to the boundaries of that. So it's really thinking of this, and it started also, of course, with the flux of populations around the world for different reasons, and we see that, and how a lot of us in different aspects are stuck in waiting. So it was really thinking of the idea of waiting and what does that mean, and within that, thinking of it in its multidimensional experience, which is not just mental but also physical and emotional as well. And really, so this project was an attempt to expand that narrative to its multidimensional experience and understanding, where waiting or suspended time actually denotes a process of transition and reconfiguration, regeneration, and reimagination, where histories, languages, entities, and spiritualities, dimensions, and temporalities coalesce. So it was, this was really a reflection on the politics of time that continues with this project that attempts to unravel the non-normative set of existing temporalities. And it started with, so first there was a research period, of course, and then it started with an exhibition that expanded further into 4 workshops that took place over the course of the year, and these workshops were coined as positions, and they were thinking through listening, movement, food, and writing, and slow writing in the form of the practice of sewing. I'm just going to read a very short excerpt from something that I had written on it to give you a better idea of how I was articulating that. Waiting as farewell, waiting as carrying within, waiting as patience, waiting as confinement, waiting as emancipation, waiting as anticipation, waiting as boredom, waiting as violence, waiting as departure, waiting as anxiety, waiting as arrival, waiting as gaining time, waiting as outside, waiting as stationary movement, waiting as moving forward without moving forward, waiting as letting go, waiting as power, waiting as a parallel existence, waiting as historicity, waiting as future, waiting as present, waiting as presence, waiting as a reason to live, waiting as near fulfillment, waiting as stillness, as awareness, as illness, waiting as collective becoming, waiting as listening, translation, and as aspiration, waiting as a temporal plane, a relationship, a near fulfillment, waiting as distance to and from, waiting as a way of being. So I'm going to, this was really also thinking of the power hierarchies within, and the person who's made to wait and the person who makes you wait, but also, or the system, but also really thinking of when do the agencies take over. So I'm going to now share 2 examples with you of our artists that had participated in this exhibition. And these are 2 positions that come from that show a very different line of thought, a very different approach to the idea of time itself. So this first work is by Dakota Guo, and Dakota is, it's titled, "I Snuggle into the Tomb Bed from My Wedding Chamber. My hair is the quilt, the spirit guiding streamer." It is in, Dakota has been working with the hauntology of corpses, and she's drawing upon the idea of the living and undead. So it is 2 different temporalities that she's touching upon, and she's really her practice is based into disrupting necrotech techniques, and this work is actually drawing upon and probing the ambivalent political potential of untamed traditions. So this idea of the corpse bride actually comes from the tradition of Chinese entombment, and the idea is to also the distance between a corpse being considered as a ghost. So it is also comes from this idea of one tradition where if a young man passes away, there has to be a bride that is buried with him. So it's really thinking through these ideas of where the undead is trapped between, this ghost is stuck between life and death, but also considered as alive, but then really without any carnal desires. This was a performance piece, and in the first slides that I showed you, that was the installation that remained throughout the exhibition. And this is to explain you a bit, to describe the work a little bit. This is, the computer has an infrared, maybe you can see in here, has an infrared camera attached to it. So the makeup that she's doing, all the red, it's not reading the red. So everything that she does is coming out as blank. And this was the bride's veil that she was wearing. She did her makeup throughout, and then she was taking the veil and wearing it on her head, as you can see in the pictures. The second, so I will now move, I'll just give you a second to look at the images, and then I will move on to another artist, Rahima Chichaga. And this is a photographic work by Rahima Chichaga, who won Up to Down. And Rahima has been working with a lot of, she works with matrilineages and drawing upon and tracing histories that are directly connected to her matrilineal histories. So she is also thinking of embodied and instinctual methodologies to that she employs through written texts, oral stories, melodies and relics for reenacted performed rituals as a source of research. And she's also describes her practice as a performative archive that untraditionally collects stories and thinks through them. So this is drawing upon, and I'm going to read out, there's the small text that's there, which was also the sound piece over here in this work. And as you can see, this is also, once again, the knowledge of craft, but also something that is thinking of intergenerational exchanges and legacies that not just bring knowledge and skill, but also stories with it. So it reads, the text reads, the sound piece reads as 2 down, 1 up. 2 down, 2 strands of Ukindu remain on the left. 2 down, 1 up. 2 down, 3 strands of Ukindu remain on the right. Left to right, right to left. 2 down, 1 up, 2 down. Shode birds, Koko Urupa, who birds Bibi Mukunde, who birds Mama Dimire, who birds me. 2 down, 1 up, 2 down. Shode becomes my daughter, Urupa becomes my niece, and Mukunde becomes my sister. 2 down, 1 up, 2 down. A pattern emerges, meticulously weaved on a long ukele. 2 down, 1 up, 2 down. A thread of history is weaved, carried across from generation to generation. So this is also what her attempt is, also to really create a space and create a platform for certain histories that then can gain a certain kind of validity as being a historical reference, because once again, this is also thinking of the role of women and how that is often erased in that or dismissed in a lot of ways. But also really thinking of, once again, how you carry time together from one generation to the other. So this is what I have for this project, and now I am going to shift to the next project in line, which is one that I'm still working on. It's still ongoing. This is unraveling the underdevelopment complex or towards a post-underdevelopment interdependence. And ode to Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So this is a project that was conceived by Bonaventure, and I am the lead curator for it, and my co-curator is Juan Pablo Garcia Sozas. And this project, as it shows, is last year was we've been working on it for 3 years now, and last year marked the 50th anniversary of this seminal work of Walter Rodney, and we've been thinking on this this project and taking Walter Rodney's work as a point of departure into articulating a question which thinks of thinks through, first of all, it thinks through post-development advocates like Ivan Illich, Gustavo Esteva, Wolfgang Sachs, Arturo Escobar, Majid Renema, and also through ecofeminist degrowth theorists like Benji Akbold, Maria Mays, Amaya Perez Orozco, Chandra Talbadi Mohanty, amongst others. And we've really been, the question that is forms the core of this project is how can we imagine a post-underdevelopment world? Now, the idea here is, so of course, it is really looking at at the dynamics of this binary and how there are certain systems that reinforce it, but also taking this idea forward into how, and post in this question, post underdevelopment is not thinking of it's not a negation, but it's rather a transcendence of this idea and thinking completely beyond and outside of it, like what are the ideas of progress? And what are these interdependencies that could be thought of? So once again, thinking of a pluriverse of interdependent imaginations, visions, and strategies that are away from capitalist and industrial productivity, but more towards transformative conviviality. So it's really thinking of the emancipation from the imperialist logic of extortion and profit of one at the detriment of the other. And this project, we have what you see here is this project, it has 5 chapters. And these chapters are located in different geographies. And what you see right now are the exhibition images from the Berlin chapter. And so these are the exhibition views. I will be discussing 2 works with you again. So the chapters we have are for this funding period, we have 5 chapters. So in Cameroon, Kenya, Cameroon was the first one, Kenya was the second one, Berlin was the third one, and then we just last week did our 4th chapter, which was in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and now we will be moving ahead to South Africa, and then to Guyana and Tanzania as well. And the idea is to really, with the chapters, the idea is to really think through these ideas, through this book, through this work, in the contemporary moment, and how it resonates to our times, and what are the strategies that are in place. Because in the process, we were looking at and thinking through the ideas of bien vivre, Sumakwasai, Ubuntu, which actually is an Agungi Bantu term, which means humanity, and in other words, it means I am because we are. So it's really thinking through these transtemporal dialogues between the dynamics that these systems are rooted in. And so I'm going to expand a little bit more on the chapters towards the end, but first I will share with you the work of Binta Dia. Binta Dia is this work is, as you can see, that it has the title has a vertical notation here. This is reflecting to a historical moment. This is the third chapter. So each chapter was basically thinking through the Chechia heads that you see in this installation. So it was reflecting on the same history. It was the same installation, but the Chechia head was the number of the Chechia heads shifted. And this is the historical moment she's referencing here, Teralou, Senegalese. This is in the Second World War, where these are the Senegalese men who fought for the French army, these who are mainly were farmers. And this is reflecting, because this is the date that there was a massacre of these Teralou Senegalese happened by the French, and they have been spread throughout in unnamed mass graves. So there's really no track of them per se. So the vertical orientation of the title is also referring to these mass graves as well. And in this installation, she is also thinking of what you see here are millet and corn seeds that were sowed, and then there were sprouts coming up throughout the exhibition, which go through. There's a hole in the Chechia head, which and they grow through that. And the idea to expand more on this, the idea of it is that, as I shared earlier, that these soldiers were coming very much from a farming background. This was also the soil and the arrangement of the soil, not just refer to the fields, but also to the trenches. And these Chechia heads are also early 19th century, which were chosen by the French armies for these men as part of their uniform, which were then also used to hide things, also sometimes used to hold rice, but then also their color was something that could be caught by the enemy from far away. And this is, in this, she's really thinking of, once again, how do you work in the absence of archive? How do you generate and how do you create an archive? How do you how does one gain closure, but how does one remember? So this work also had a sound piece together with this, in which there is one person who's reciting all the names of the soldiers, which is actually echoing the Wolof oral tradition of remembering and acknowledging a person's qualities in a more expansive way. And this is coupled together with the sound of a Guinean flute, which was written and performed by a musician and griot, Dudu Kouate, which is a continuation of a West African tradition dating as far back as the 10th century. So this is thinking of yes, it's really thinking of how can one claim space for obscured narratives, and how there are always these alternative histories that are at the base of these events. The next work I am going to show you is by Marie-Claire Messouma, Mon Lumbien. Marie-Claire is working through hybrid cultures and how to live together with the multiple identities. So she's also, and how with the domination of one, it is the other is carried forward. So she creates these maps. This is map 23. She is comes from an Ivorian French father and a Guadeloupe mother, and was born and has lived in France most of her life, but also also is coming from the Akan ethnic group, her ancestry. So it's really through these maps, she's thinking through the natural and the industrial, where she's pairing some organic material, which includes horsehair, textiles, but also some ceramic pieces that she's creating herself, but also everyday objects that are very common and very ordinary in use. So she's also thinking of the precious and the common over here. And so what she's really thinking of, and these a lot of these textile pieces, they are found, and it's made with raffian. The entire piece is woven together, and she's thinking with these through these found and hidden poems, intentions, drawings, and expressions, which are inspired by the Akan symbol made up of a double crocodile head with two tails and one body, which is actually coming from an Ashanti proverb, which says, "We have many mouths, but one belly," which really thinks of, is thinking, once again, thinking of community, thinking of clans, thinking of a unity. And once again, this idea of I am because we are. So this is, once again, how these maps become symbols which, represent what cannot be seen but can be inhabited by emblems. So next, I am going to move towards the chapters that briefly touch upon some of the different chapters that we have been manifesting in different places. So one more very important point that I really would like to mention is that the idea of these collaborations is for one, to work with initiatives on the ground and practitioners, and to create a space together with them for a discursive session, for ideas to flow, for experiences to be shared. So these have all been so far have been discursive sessions, which of course have had sonic activations within them as well, which of course are very just as important. And the first one took place in Banjul at the Banjul Art Station, which has been established by the artist Bartolomeo Togo, a space where for the local community and for the artists on the ground who can come and use the space. And maybe some of you know that Cameroon is divided in Anglophone and Francophone, and there continues to be a civil war today, which is quite lethal. So it becomes very, very difficult for a lot of people to sometimes practice. So these spaces have a very different importance. And I would also like to share that, so this also became a point. There was one alliance that came out of it. We had, this in itself was a 2-day event of what we like to call invocations, where we invite practitioners from all kinds of disciplines to share ideas and thoughts and their practices, and also music performances by some indigenous groups. And this was followed by a residency by 2 artists who actually came from each part of the Anglophone and Francophone Cameroon, and this residency took place in Berlin. And now this alliance is continuing, and they are both doing projects, and it was quite interesting because when they came together, they also shared that Grace is from the Anglophone side, and Bobo is from the Cameroonian side, and from the Francophone side, and she had actually not been to that part before. So there is some very, very interesting work happening now, and they recently just also had an event at the Goethe Institute over there in Douala. The second one on the right is the chapter from Nairobi that you see, and this we did with this fantastic group of young women called the African who run the space African Digital Heritage, which is run by Chao Teana. And she, together with 2 other practitioners, had curated, they decided to create a project out of this, which was a sound archive. And they initiated this archive. So what you see are, this was, the event was listening sessions at the launch, and they had been doing a lot of research in which they were inviting development studies students from the universities and asking them, having discussions around Walter Rodney, but also other scholars who have other African scholars who have written a lot about it. So this was a moment where they then had discussions with these students, but then also invited some activists, a feminist group, a rap singer, and a journalist to come to each do an episode. So the listening session, so they prepped and they prepared. There was they had engaged quite a lot of young people, and who engaged with the, it was quite wonderful to see how they engaged with the work, with the context, and also very much connected it to the local context, and then we're making these connections with it. So this event was also had, it started with a listening session of those podcasts, and then it had some performances and talks with some with the other practitioners. It opened it up, and it was really, this was a multi-generational experience. It was really enriching to see, because it also had a generation of activists who then were sharing their time and how they were engaged in activism, and what were their ideals and what were their thoughts and learnings from that. But then, alongside, there were also school teachers as well who had who were actually the teachers of some of the participants and who were reflecting on it. So it was really, even throughout the event, the conversation moved a lot. And this is an ongoing archive, so they plan to continue building up on it. And that was just the starting point of it. Then we had, on the top left, you see, what you see is a small glimpse of the of the Abidjan chapter, which we just had last week. This is the people you see in the background is Frank Herman Ikra and Lassane Zahouri. And this was an intergenerational exchange. It was quite interesting because this is once again, this was a group of people who had experienced, because for the last 30 years, ever since the death of the first president, there has been deep turmoil politically in the country, and which is still, West Africa is still very much controlled by the French, but also it is, in the last 30 years, there have been a coup d'etat, a revolutionary war, and two wars, and a civil war. So it's been in deep turmoil, and it's interesting because the idea of it is also one of the biggest exporters of coffee and cocoa, but these are two products that are not consumed locally the way they are in Europe. So it was interesting to hear. We had a lot of artists. Lassane Zahouri is a cartoonist in a satirical newspaper called Gibish, and we had lots of different voices, but also it was quite enlightening to hear the experiences of the people who have witnessed the time of the first president, which was actually a dictatorship as well. But then because things were still stable, there is a certain kind of, it is of course quite complex and complicated, but there is still a kind of idealization of that time period. And meanwhile, the younger generation has a very, very different idea around it. And I don't know, maybe some of you know about the musical genres, which became the voice of resistance and started from the student bodies in the late 1990s, which is Zouglou, and then Zouglou gave birth to Coupé Décalé, which was formed in Paris. Actually, it came out of Paris, and it became so popular that it's now known all over the world. But Coupé Décalé actually means to cheat and run. So it was really, these were forms of resistance which were really thinking of how do we subvert the system and work through them. Now I am, as there is still time, I am going to quickly move on to the last project. And this is one that Stephen and some of Stephen's students had the chance to visit as well. This is Indigo Waves and Other Stories, Renavigating the Afro-Asian Sea and Notions of Diaspora, which is a research and multi-chapter project. It just culminated, the exhibition parts culminated just in August. There was one exhibition in Zuid-Smoka in Cape Town, which is actually the meeting point of the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic. And we basically, and then the next two chapters took place in Berlin at Gropius Bau and Savvy Contemporary simultaneously, so they were resonating with each other. So the idea of this project was really to look into the history of water-based exchanges across this vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, and that have generated, and these exchanges that have generated cultural and social affinities between the African and Asian continents. And it was really, the idea of these exhibitions was to take us from ancient routes of trans-regional explorations, trade and seasonal migration, up through contemporary Afro-Asian affinities, geopolitical, economic, and cultural exchanges, from language to food to sound to wind, water, economies, philosophies, and more. And this is also, of course, really looking into into ideas of into the histories of enslavement, but also looking into histories of indentured labor, importantly, and then looking into syncretic cultures that have actually emerged through these exchanges as well, and how these how the like thinking of this idea and how the Afrasian imaginary and what how does that come together. So the two projects that I would this is just to give you once again an idea of the exhibition layout. This is the exhibition views that you see here are actually all from Savvy Contemporary that we had held. And the projects that I would really like to share with you here is one by Ilan Ticker-Rayburn. And this is, once again, I was earlier mentioning, and these examples also actually think through that. And this is, once again, thinking through craft knowledges and how they become a point of multi-generational and become multilingual weaving and mat making. So what we see is actually these are different. It's a 63-meter long ticker made of pandas leaves, and it comprises an index of the different heritage weaving patterns from the Bajau community. And this is like, it was made to create a woven bridge across between Pulau Umadal and the water village where most of the stateless Bajau Sama de Laut weavers working with, who have worked on this project, they live. So it was really, once again, drawing a bridge between, so these are communities on the coastal area who are deemed stateless, and then also communities in the hinterland who come within the region of Borneo. So it's really, once again, thinking of how communities continue to engage, to read in this way, read each other and learn from each other's motives, yet once again archiving certain histories and legacies within these patterns that become so it was really the idea of how can these old languages and aesthetics inform the contemporary visual languages. And so this is a dictionary of what they call a dictionary of heritage patterns that come from the outreaches of the national borders, and creates a cultural bridge that that transcends all the national borders overland. The next work is by the Indo-Fijian artist Kishil Charan. This is also thinking of craft knowledge, but it is also thinking of once again reflecting similarly to what I'd showed you with Rahima. It is thinking of intergenerational exchange and creating a space for these narratives as well. Kishil has a background, has indentured ancestry, and so the idea of textile as archive, because the special thing about Kishil's practice is that she works together, that on her work, her grandmother, her mother, her grandmother's sister, and her 3 generations work together. And this is, it started with embroidery. It is also eco-printed. So they also have, of course, a history of farming, and also what you see. So the textile has been eco-printed from material that came from within their kitchen and that they use for their daily food. And this is items that come from a very different geography, but also what you see on the border is dyed with marigold and hibiscus that she grew in her garden. And the story of these marigold and hibiscus presence in current day New Zealand is through these histories of intenture, because this was something that women were carrying in their scarves when they were brought to the island. It is drawing upon quite a few of so it's drawing upon these histories, but also thinking of this idea, the embroidery as and continuing these legacies. The importance of continuing these legacies is also a form of resistance to the marginalization, to colonialism, and to like through women who have resisted and kept alive all these traditions, and with that, in the making of it, it is also a point of communion, because it reflects the building of a family, of a community, because everyone comes together and spends hours. So it's like almost like slow writing, where you are tying together all these narratives. With this idea, the idea of embroidery is that it continues it's never finished. So it is something that will continue to be worked upon. This is thinking once again, I think I've shared almost everything about that. But it's really to conclude, I think like it's really thinking of these different strategies of how preservation of narratives is taking place, how which is once again, as I shared in the beginning, that it's not constricted to the written word, but there are multiple different ways. And I think one very important point that I would like to mention here is also the sonic presence throughout, because the sound and how that travels throughout this region, and the resonances and the exchanges, that really becomes a compass to navigate this region. So there was also a strong presence of sound in this both these like all of these iterations, and becomes a very, very important point to continue this research forward into thinking of sound practices and how they continue to emerge and continue to evolve and emerge and have traveled throughout. And I sadly could not share it because of connection. I was a bit hesitant sharing them because of connection issues. Thankfully, everything has so far gone by smoothly. But I would just like to end this presentation with a very short excerpt from a poetry by Biraj Diop called Breaths. It's an excerpt from his poem Breaths. And this is, Biraj Diop is a Senegalese poet and storyteller who's been played an integral role in preserving African folktales. Listen more often to things rather than beings. Hear the fire's voice, hear the voice of water. In the wind, hear the sobbing of the trees. It is our forefathers breathing. Thank you.
Thank you, Hasha. So there are a couple of questions. Let's just jump right to them, since our timing is very good, actually. So Michelle has written, is your role as curator not becoming more one of ethno-socio-archivist?
I think, but do we really have to, like, once again, like, that's the idea, right? That it is an art in itself, and the position that I carry, I'm not I do not consider myself an expert in anything, but it is that fluidity and being able to accommodate the different disciplines within that, and being able to touch upon. So in that case, if it comes through as ethno-socialist, then yeah, that's good. I think if I share other projects, then it might appear as something very different. But I think like that is also really a lot about, because also to share with you, like my knowledge or the places I look for knowledge and the references, that they are not limited to the art discourse. They are very much informed by these different disciplines as well. So, so yes, if there are some shades of these things within the practice, then I think I'm a good student.
Okay. All right. And next, with Rodney's provocation, were you and or the Savvy team thinking of having the project running longer in time? I was very intrigued by the open call, but after engaging with Rodney, I found myself at a lack of articulation and overwhelming realizations that is taking me some time to come around. I thank the Savvy team for such an open space that is life-changing from afar.
Thank you so much. This project has, I don't know, it really makes doing what we do like really worthwhile, especially to see the kind of resonances. And I just would like to share that you would be surprised that I was just mentioning about the chapters, and you would be surprised that there were quite a few places that had not read the text, or they were vaguely familiar with Rodney, but had not read the text. And it is not part of the curriculums in these countries either. And I guess we all know the answer to that. But the idea is, I think what you're talking about is the publication, and I agree with you. But I also very much agree with you that reading it for the first time, it is a lot to grasp, and it really actually shifts everything on its head. But sadly, we definitely plan to carry it forward. The project continues. We can't, and I think this was also a realization that we had while we have been progressing with it. We have been working on it for 3 years now, that we can't just stop. And with the publication, the limitation was because of the funding, because we have to meet some deadlines. But I really hope that we will definitely try. And also to share with you, the publication format is called as a Savvy Journal, and this is going to be an ongoing format. So perhaps please keep a lookout. Maybe you can contribute to the upcoming issues. This one, the first one, is focusing, it's a special one, it's focusing more on Rodney, but of course there's a lot of resonance between our projects, so we will be working on similar themes as well. So yes, I'm sure you'll get a chance.
Great. Okay.
Thank you for your input.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Next week, by the way, next Wednesday is a session with Anselm Frank. And Hajra, thank you so much. And we will see you shortly with the students.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you
Bye
for joining.
Okay, bye.